Following episode of the Intrepid podcast contains themes and topics that may not be suited for individuals under the age of 18. If you're 18 years old and below, please, for the love of everything that is holy, stop listening and focus on what you need to do. With that out of the way, let's get started. Ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, Spotify, and Substack, you read the title of this episode right. The Philippines has a big fucking problem. And it's not just figuratively, I literally meant the specific art and act of fucking. From our Austronesian roots to the colonial loopholes to the post-independence libertine lifestyle to the age of social media when simps on two wheels hang around Ayala Avenue on Sundays to do creepy shit, the Philippines is having an issue regarding its moral compass and the notion of sexuality as time passes on. It ranges from bomba films and its successors to the four-letter P word to the rise of suggestive content on social media to proposals on making sex education a curriculum in Philippine classrooms. Now, how far down the rabbit hole have we gone? Is there a chance to return? Should parents take the lead once more in letting their children understand how the human body works, especially what they have downstairs? And more importantly, how should we address all of this? On this episode of the Intrepid podcast, the first for 2025, we're going to look at how the Filipino understanding of sexuality needs to be course corrected, because it is not just our problem as a whole, but it is also a particular problem for me. With that said, the Intrepid podcast starts now. Hi, I'm Ian Riñon, an independent alternative media practitioner among other things, and aside from being a recovering cynic and a suspecting neurodivergent, I also happen to struggle with hypersexuality, or so I thought. And welcome to the very first episode of the Intrepid podcast for 2025. Now, before we get to the meat of this video, no pun intended, let me explain why I am doing this as the newest episode of the Intrepid podcast. Because for some reason, I have a story to tell. The Father General, when he was still a seafarer, has brought home some, let's just say, suggestive content which, to the old man's defense, was sent to him by his younger colleagues aboard the ships he called his workplace. Obviously, teenage me got hold of these contents and, like everyone else during my time, hid it away from the prying eyes of everyone and, gooned on them before the word was even a thing. Yes, Gen Z and Gen Alpha people, I am not ashamed to call myself one of the last of the millennials because I am that old. Now, this went on as I progressed through high school and even the first few months in university, although I have several instances of me doing so in the past 4 years I was in university. I understand that this is part of growing up, especially when you have so much pent-up emotions inside that you just can't release by crying. And mind you, caring for one's mental health was not yet a thing in those days. And I was not the typical teenager back then. I was what I now suspect, in retrospect, a nice guy who always finishes last in the race of life, okay? Not during sexual intercourse. Now, I had a lull when I was taking my bachelor's degree because perhaps because I was also discerning if I was called to not just finish it, but also to enter the seminary, a prospect I eventually veered away from. But upon graduation, I relapsed so hard that I lost count how many times I jerked off. And it ruined my morals and indirectly my career. All of a sudden, the pandemic hit. By then, I began realizing how suggestive content and masturbation literally and figuratively fucked me up. With small wins in habit building and self awareness, and let's just say a little divine intervention too, I was able to control my gooning problem, but traces of it remain to this day, which I still definitely have to double my efforts in. And I have to admit, I was writing the script for this episode during the concluding phase of what some people call post-nut clarity. Yes, I am still struggling with addiction to suggestive content and touching what I have downstairs. So, your help in any way, including prayers and thoughts for my well being, is definitely appreciated. With that necessary catharsis out of the way, allow me to connect my story to the topic I wanted to discuss. But let me just clarify here that this episode is not intended to be a deep dive about the history of sexuality in the Philippines, but it is safe to say that providing some historical context to all of the current things we are sorting out goes a long way. Prior to the arrival of European powers, our pre-Hispanic ancestors can be considered a balance between civilized and promiscuous, as several polities have been at war with each other, spreading their influence into smaller tribes and communities and spreading the legs of women. While some pre-Hispanic women intentionally do so in a suggestive manner, there are instances like that based on historical records and, the cultures of those people at the time. When the Spaniards came, their religious friars intended to temper our sexuality with the Catholic doctrine of marriage as it was understood at the time, and that last phrase is important to note. This did not stop the natives from relapsing into their natural human instincts that produced not only marital and societal implications, but also bastard children and orphans depending on the situation. Hell, even the Spaniards themselves seem to flare up their sexual and marital prowess over each other, so that's that. But before we blame it all on the Spaniards, we must not forget that the fact we are facing a moral crisis in terms of sexuality and hypersexuality is a direct result of American imperialism and its modern side effects. When the United States annexed the Philippines in 1898 under the then President William McKinley, the country's Protestant work ethic and tendency to find a loophole in every situation became so ingrained in us that we still suffer the consequences of such to this day. But more of that later. First, I would just like to take this opportunity to promote all of my socials. I am on Facebook, X/Twitter, Instagram, and of course here on YouTube, because the Intrepid podcast is on YouTube on my channel Intrepid Ian Reñon. It is also on Spotify. So I am uploading this on those two platforms, and the article version of this podcast is also on Substack. I would also upload a recorded version of that article there on Substack. So just make sure to like this video and share this around. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Intrepid Ian Reñon, and ring the notification bell by selecting all, as well as follow me on podcast and all of my socials. I've mentioned it earlier. And do also subscribe to my Substack blog. The name of that blog is the Intrepid Files. You can check it out at intrepidianreñon.substack.com without the Enye on my family name. And yeah, do follow me for that and for future content for this Jubilee year of 2025. Now, before we continue with the American contribution to the Filipino sexuality problem, we must not forget that the Japanese were sadly credited for the trauma of using local women as sex toys to relieve the itch of Japanese soldiers for sex. That, though, is another can of worms I would rather leave to legitimate historians, since I am merely a history enthusiast and not worthy of being called an amateur historian. Our status as an independent nation post-war was then a blur. It started out fine, but then in the 1960s and 70s, a series of strange events happened in the Philippines and across the world, namely the Cold War, the Sexual Revolution, the Second Vatican Council, the rise of Ferdinand Marcos Sr., and the First Quarter Storm, which led into the martial law era. During that latter stage of our nation's history, at that time, was when the sense of morality had been distorted, as several media content at the time, such as films and music, specifically those released by Hagibis, you know, that music group who has been singing songs like Katawan, legs, legs, legs mo ay nakakasilaw. Those things, okay? These several media content during the 60s and 70s experimented on the seedy and the sensual. No wonder I added Hagibis in this as an example for this. By the time the 1980s rolled in, and as the Marcoses were driven from power by the middle of the decade, all that pent-up emotions people had started to rear its ugly head in the form of bomba and pene films. The former focused on actresses who are considered bombshells or very much attractive to expose their naked upper bodies in front of the camera, thus the Tagalized term bomba. The latter, on the other hand, which is technically a subset of bomba films, but is going the extra mile of making literal sexual penetration either by the actors themselves or by horny extras, thus the term pene, is basically an early form of middle ground between softcore and hardcore. You know what I mean. Come to think of it, the Philippine showbiz industry, which could be considered an imperfect but graspable microcosm of Filipino society, for this example alone, I guess, is full of celebrities who have relationships with each other, have kids with each other, get married and or separate, and so on. It only goes to show that the issue runs very, very deep. And I'm not gonna make a pun on that, because this script that I've written is already filled with sexual puns, okay? I don't want to, but I've got to entertain as much as inform, okay? That's one of the things that I really wanted to do in 2025. So please forgive me for doing all that shit. Because you see, after our independence was recognized in 1946, remember, we declared it back in 1898, American influence steadily encroached on our Spanish-Filipino heritage. Por eso, no hablamos español. Qué triste. That's why we don't speak Spanish. It's so sad. That's the translation of what I said in Spanish. Okay? Alongside that cultural and patrimonial erosion is the fact that the United States itself is on the moral crossroads during that time. And when the boomers were in their physical and professional prime, they basically set a new groundwork on how things go. From the rise of feminism to the rise of the rainbow movement, of which the first two waves of each out of four is already accepted as a norm, and for all intents and purposes, it should have stopped at that. But then again, here we are. And let's not discuss the recent allegations regarding Stephen Kenneth Bonnell II, aka Destiny, because my goodness, he is so fucking cooked. I mean, if you have listened, or if you have watched, or you have listened to my piece on YouTube, an audio piece on YouTube called The Dark Destiny of Stephen Bonnell, I have said there that if Destiny doesn't stop with all of his bullshit, he's gonna get caught. And lo and behold, he got caught. One of the things, or one of the videos that exposed Destiny was a video by I think this is also a leftist guy, but he's a much more sensible leftist guy than Destiny. The YouTuber is named President Sunday. I'll link it in the description on YouTube as well as on the Spotify and Substack show notes. So yeah, let's not get into that because it's a very, very big can of worms that deserves its own video or podcast, whatever, its own content. I may only be merely doing it as a brood banter, but you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna do it as a separate video. Okay? I'm getting massively sidetracked. Okay, let's get back. Commercialism also grew its roots in America after the war, which became the economic framework of modern Japan. Gone are the days of Bushido, martial arts, and banzai charges, as they have been replaced with the same Protestant work ethic and loophole-finding behavior the Americans influenced the Philippines with. The result is a population that works until they literally drop and finds pleasure in anything, and I mean anything, outside office hours. This includes, by the way, pent-up emotions of being able to quote-unquote do it with the opposite sex without the consequence of pregnancy, which in turn becomes a population problem as no one is replacing the older generations no matter how horny they are. And the Japanese government had to prop it up with immigration from Peru, Brazil, and other Asian neighbors like the Philippines. And back at home, Bomba Films eventually got driven out from the mainstream, but made its resurgence in the cable and indie scene as well as the internet, which basically made them outright suggestive content. Talk about love stories and dramas on Netflix and Viva Max, although there's more sex scenes on content released on the latter. I mean, it's the same fucking company that brought together what millennial Filipinos like me considered as a group similar to the MCU's Avengers. They are called the Viva Hot Babes. And goodness gracious me, I think they haven't aged too much. Okay? I don't know. I really don't want to talk about it. I'm going to be sidetracked again on that, but let's leave it at that. And in looking at the underbelly of this issue lies the most depraved, the most degenerate, and the most unfortunate stories of how people literally fucked around and found out. In the first weeks of January 2025, I personally was involved in calling out fellow cyclists who happened to be fucking freaks after a short vertical video of them stalking out females in active gear utilizing the car-free Sundays at Ayala Avenue surfaced. Backlash against Wilbert Luna and Ryan Betidos was swift, succinct, surgical, and most importantly, succulent. I do not wish them a bad life, but jail time must be part of the solution. And now, across the Pacific, we now hear of allegations of revenge content from Destiny. It's not just the sexual shit that he has been into for the longest time. He has been a bit of a manipulator. And come to think of it, what he has done may be parallel to or even surpassing what Sean Diddy Combs has done last year. So holy shit, 2025 is at a good start for YouTube drama. That's what I can say about that. But then again, all of that was just the tip of the iceberg. Because in the motorcycle community, the volume of riders presenting a sexually hyped attitude seems to be very, very high, especially here in the Philippines. Motovlogs, similar to cycling vlog content from simps like Luna and Betidos, have a sprinkle, or maybe a shower depending on the creator, of sexual innuendos and suggestive content that originally came out of TikTok, which the Americans tried to ban on the dying days of the Biden administration, only for Donald Trump to promise a 90-day extension to have the platform at least partially American-owned. And at the same time, for American creators in the platform to relocate to another Chinese app called RedNote. But that's a story for another time. Let this exposure of these simps on two wheels be a warning to the rest of the cycling and motorcycle communities to not be dickheads and to keep their dicks in their pants. And I don't want to be the hypocrite here because I am including myself here. Myself included, by the way. So that, I would also be accountable for myself. However, what makes this twisted is the fact that some people sell sex out of desperation. An article from The Flame, the official student publication of the University of Santo Tomas Faculty of Arts and Letters, and full disclosure, I got my bachelor's degree there, revealed that some motorcycle ride-hailing app riders resort to what they call extra service, a Filipino connotation for anything sex-related, to make ends meet. Then, there is this subreddit, a Filipino subreddit called Alas Juicy. And no, I am not going to link the damn subreddit on this podcast. Not on YouTube, not on Spotify, not on Substack. I haven't done that. I will never do it. It's all degenerate shit. In fact, it's the whole of fucking Reddit. While I understand that the platform is helpful in some ways, other times I am just repulsed with the fact that sexual and suggestive content find their place there, that the platform became a humongous can of fucking worms in itself. The problem with this and other similar sex stories, prostitution or otherwise, is that it either goes three ways: HIV, pregnancy, or sadly, both. But then again, the powers that be, in their high and mighty wisdom, has recently proposed a bill introducing what they considered as comprehensive sexuality education. Needless to say, some progressive folks wanted to have children taught sexuality, safe sex, the concept of consent, and all of the rainbow mafia stuff and all of the other regurgitations I have already considered bullshit since I was involved in the legal struggle against the passing of the Reproductive Health Act of 2012. Although I also understand the premise that this is proposed because of the fact that the age of pregnancy is becoming ever so slightly decreasing, which is absolutely alarming across the political and cultural spectrum, not just here in the Philippines, but abroad. Obviously, conservatives are at the forefront of this recent pushback, led by a non-profit group called Project Talisay, which is headed by former Supreme Court Chief Justice Maria Lourdes Sereno. And by the way, the Tagalog word Talisay means pure, implying the group's mission to preserve the innocence of children as much as possible despite the constant assault of the algorithm. Then on both sides, there are also observations of people who seem to be woke or anti-woke, but only for the sake of trolling, which is sadly unfortunate and frankly hypocritical. I respect their grind, but that is just basically being contrarian for the sake of talking back. That only increases the polarization our society is already experiencing, and especially now that we are in an election year here in the Philippines, and all of that is not good. While I do not consider myself a hardcore conservative, I empathize with their efforts and I personally know some of the thought leaders of the movement. At the same time, I also befriend and appreciate some liberals and progressives I know who gravitate towards the center to make compromises for the benefit of the common good, as it should be. Talk about countering the horseshoe theory with the Overton window. If you don't know the things that are, if you don't know those two, look it up. It's on Google. With that said, the bottom line I wanted to share is this. Sex education should have begun at home. Now, here are some afterthoughts. After reading Dr. Jordan B. Peterson's bestseller 12 Rules for Life, which I have made a book review on YouTube, do check it out. I'll also link it in the description and in the show notes. I immediately remembered that several of his rules apply to this topic alone. In fact, I think all of it can be related to this, and here's a quick fire round on how I related this topic to the book. And I would like to apologize in advance if it is too direct. Rule 1. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. Learn from the parable of the lobster and understand that gooning is the way of bending your spine in shame. Rule 2. Treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. To remove yourself from sexual degeneracy, you must accept the responsibility to be a decent person and to no longer goon. Rule 3. Make friends with people who want the best for you. Making friends may not be easy, but real friends tell their friends to stop jerking off. Rule 4. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. Forget Andrew Tate or Destiny. Fuck both of them. Be your own person. Rule 5. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. If you ever become a parent, never expose your kids to sexual content before their teenage years. In fact, you better fucking take proactive measures once they hit puberty. Rule 6. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. Clean your fucking room first. It reeks of semen and saliva. Rule 7. Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. E-girls and adult stars suck. You can do it better out there in the dating field. Rule 8. Tell the truth or at least don't lie. Be authentic to yourself and to others. You are more than just a gooner. Rule 9. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. Get into a real conversation where no innuendos are allowed. Rule 10. Be precise in your speech. Shoot straight. Tell that special person you like him or you like her. Rule 11. Do not bother children when they are skateboarding. Be kind to others and to yourself, especially if you and the other person are on your way to recovery. And Rule 12. Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. The real one, okay? Not what ladies have downstairs. Unless you are married, okay? So that's the quick fire round of Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. Do check out my review of his book on YouTube. I link it in the description and in the show notes on Spotify and Substack. In conclusion, sex education should have begun at home, but now it can be taught anywhere. With that said, we have the opportunity to sort out the mess the sexual revolution of the 1960s figuratively and literally fucked us over by doing our due diligence as the adults in the room. For starters, why not begin with teaching students about their inherent human dignity? And for Catholics, why not complement that with Pope John Paul II's Theology of the Body, a document about the human body and sexuality written by a literal Catholic saint? If you're like me, who is struggling to stop gooning, there is hope. You have a friend in me. But if you are a constant gooner, go fuck yourself. Now, I would like to end this episode of the Intrepid podcast with several passages From the Confessions of St. Augustine. This man can be considered the poster boy of second chances because, just like most of us who aspire to become good men, he was once a nice guy who had his gooner face. Now that he is venerated as a saint and doctor of the church, may his wise words of prayer be also ours. Great art thou, O Lord, and greatly to be praised. Great is thy power, and thy wisdom infinite. In thee would man praise. Man, but a particle of thy creation. Man that bears about him his mortality, the witness of his sin, the witness that thou resistest the proud. Yet would man praise thee, he but a particle of thy creation. Thou awakest us to delight in thy praise, for thou hast made us for thyself, and our heart is restless until it repose in thee. Hear, O Lord, my prayer. Let not my soul faint under thy discipline, nor let me faint in confessing unto thee all thy mercies, whereby thou hast drawn me out of my most evil ways, that thou mightest become a delight to me above all the allurements which I once pursued, that I may most entirely love thee, and clasp thy hand with all my affections, and thou mayest yet rescue me from every temptation, even unto the end. For lo, O my King and my God, for thy service be whatever useful thing my childhood learned, for thy service that I speak, write, read, reckon. For thou didst grant me thy discipline while I was learning vanities, and my sin of delighting in those vanities thou hast forgiven. In them indeed I learned many a useful word, but these may as well be learned in things not vain, and that is the safe path for the steps of youth. I cry thy mercy, my God. For these very sins, as riper years succeed, these very sins are transferred from tutors and masters, from nuts and balls and sparrows, to magistrates and kings, to gold and manors and slaves, just as severer punishments displace the cane. It was the low stature then of childhood which thou, our King, didst commend as an emblem of lowliness, when thou saidst, of such is the kingdom of heaven. Where was I, and how far was I exiled from the delights of thy house in that 16th year of the age of my flesh, when the madness of lust, to which the human shamelessness giveth free license, though unlicensed by thy laws, took the rule over me, and I resigned myself wholly to it. My friends meanwhile took no care by marriage to save my fall. Their only care was that I should learn to speak excellently and be a persuasive orator. Too late loved I thee, O thou beauty of ancient days yet ever new. Too late I loved thee, and behold thou wert within, and I abroad, and there I searched for thee. Deformed I, plunging amid those fair forms which thou hadst made. Thou wert with me, but I was not with thee. Things held me far from thee, which unless they were in thee were not at all. Thou calledst and shoutedst and burstest my deafness. Thou flashest, shonest, and scatteredst my blindness. Thou breathedst odors, and I drew in breath and panted for thee. I tasted and hunger and thirst. Thou touchedst me, and I burned for thy peace. O Lord God, give peace unto us, for thou hast given us all things. The peace of rest, the peace of the Sabbath, which hath no evening. For all this most goodly array of things very good, having finished their courses, is to pass away. For in them there was morning and evening. For then shalt thou rest in us, as now thou workest in us. And so shall that be thy rest through us, as these are thy works through us. But thou, Lord, ever workest, and art ever at rest. Nor dost thou see in time, nor art moved in time, nor restest in a time. And yet thou makest things seen in time, yea, the times themselves and the rest which results from time. But thou, being the good which needeth no good, art ever at rest, because thy rest is thou thyself. And what man can teach man to understand this? Or what angel an angel? Or what angel a man? Let it be asked of thee, sought in thee, knocked for at thee. So shall it be received. So shall it be found. So shall it be opened. Amen. On that note, I end today's podcast, the first for 2025. I would like to thank you all for listening, especially because I am looking for a way to make myself more productive now that I have more time in my hands. The recording for this episode would be available on YouTube, Spotify, and Substack, with further plans to expand to other platforms, so make sure to check out for that. And all of the materials I have referenced for this episode would be listed in the recording's description and the Spotify and Substack show notes. If you think there are things I might not have included in this recording, or if you want to have your say about the matter, please feel free to leave them in the comments below if applicable, especially because this is a hot button topic. Also, before you go, please make sure to like this video if you're on YouTube and share this around. Subscribe as well to my YouTube channel, Intrepid Ian Reñon, and ring the notification bell by selecting all so you wouldn't miss out with whatever future content I may create. Please follow me along as well on Spotify and Substack for more podcast episodes, and also so that you don't have to waste your time watching an audio-only YouTube video. Anyway, with all that said, this is Intrepid Ian Reñon reminding you to at all times be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Until then, look alive, stay alive, be kind to yourself and to each other, and as always, thank you for tuning in. From here in Intrepid HQ, since it's still January, a Happy New Year, and see you next time for another talk here on the Intrepid Podcast. Ian out.